The Pokemon anime has done something completely unprecedented in the anime's history, and that is that they have shown us a brand new region. While Pokemon typically sticks kind of to the status quo of the games and sticks to the regions introduced in the games, Horizons decided to take this another step and introduce their own little land called Loqua. Now, it's unclear if Loqua is its own region or if Loqua is a part of another region, but either way, it's not a part of any region that we've seen before, which makes this really different. Today, I will be compiling a Pokédex for the Loqua region based off of what we've seen in the anime, as well as kind of figuring out what a game set in this Loqua region could look like. Welcome back to the post where we talk about all things Pokemon, and today we'll be talking about the Loqua region, its Pokedex, the Pokemon that you can find here, as well as just kind of what a game set in Loqua could look like. Do I think they'll do it? No, but it is fun to talk about. Of course, this is going to contain some story spoilers for Pokemon Horizons, specifically up to Pokemon Horizons episode 89, so if you're keeping up with the English dub and not the original version with English subs, then you might be a little confused in this video and you might want to save it for later. Going ahead and giving that final spoiler warning. Okay, you should be gone. Let's get into it. So with Loqua, we don't really know where it's near. We know that the actual land of Loqua is pretty fabled. It sits on top of this mountain, whereas there's kind of a region surrounding it. We see the cast of Pokemon Horizons visit this village, and basically, yeah, what I've done is I've compiled a Pokedex based off the wild Pokemon we've seen in this land that they're in, as well as the Pokemon owned by trainers that live in the Loqua region. I'm not including every Pokemon you see in Loqua, because then it's okay, well, we see Lico's Florigado in Horizons in Loqua. Okay, but that's not a Pokemon that lives there. Instead, I'm thinking the townspeople, one guy has a Spheal, so we can infer he probably, since he lives here, caught that Spheal here. But first, let's start with the starters, because something really interesting about Loqua is that it has multiple starters living here in this region, which is insane. Normally a region only has a handful of starters, usually just the 3 that you start the game with, but every once in a while you'll see one that has ones outside of that. But nope, not Loqua. Loqua has several wild starters. Interestingly enough, though, none of these starters that we see are fire type. They're all grass or water starters. So we're having to kind of create our own fire starter for the Loqua region. And I won't be sticking with a new Pokemon. Instead, I will be going with an older one, kind of on the assumption that if we did ever get a game set in this Loqua region, it would be kind of like a Legends game. And so we would get a mixed batch of starters. So you see that in the Loqua Dex, you'll see that there's the grass and water starters from the Alola region, as well as the Johto region. So I'm going to say that our fire starter is Litten, because Cyndaquil already got to be a starter in a Legends game and Legends Arceus, so we're going to say that Litten also lives here, and Litten would be one of our starters. As for the other 2 starters, well, Froakie's the odd man out. We see that there are wild Froakie that live in the Loqua region, but there is no Fennekin or Chespin here. So we're going to say Froakie's our other starter, and then same thing for Turtwig. We don't see wild Piplup or Chimchar, but we do know that there are wild Torterra living in Loqua, which means there has to be wild Turtwig. So we're going to say Turtwig's our other starter. So our starters are Froakie, Turtwig, and Litten. Now on to the Dex. Like I said, where I'm getting these Pokemon from are from the actual anime. We see these Pokemon wild or owned by natives to the Loqua region throughout the story. So some of these I am having to infer on, so bear with me on that, and I'll let you know which ones those are. Alright, so this is a great example of one. Starting off, we have Noibat. We have seen wild Noibat. We haven't seen a wild Noivern, but I'm going to assume that because Noibat's here, Noivern's here. There's a couple that are like that, like the very next one that I have listed here is the Trapinch line. We've seen Trapinch and Vibrava, or rather, we've seen Vibrava, which means there has to be Trapinch, and then we're going to assume that Flygon's also here. But then we also have the Dwebble line, Turtonator, Spheal line, Larvitar line, the Nidoran. I'm assuming that because we've seen a Nidoking, that the Nidoran female and Nidorina and Nidoqueen would also live here. Then we have the Badoo line, the Hoppip line, the Azora line, the Skitty line, the Wurmple line. Specifically, we've seen Beautifly, so I'm going to assume we can also see Dustox and Cascoon here. The Combee line, Blitzel line, the Eevee line. We've seen a handful of evolutions. I'm going to assume they're all here. Sawsbuck and Deerling, the Dunsparce line, Munna line, Bidoof line, the Shinx line, Caterpie line, Poliwag line, the Wingull line, the Routes line, the Burmy line, Pachirisu, the Petalil line, the Litleo line, the Wooloo line, the Pidgey line, and real quick, we're going to revisit that Petalil because I am going to be assuming that the evolution we'll see for this Petalil is Lilligant and the Unnovan version of it specifically, and not Hisuian Lilligant. Then we have the Trumbeak line, or Peekapek line, the Skiddo line, the Finneon line, the Wimpod line, the Roggenrola line, the Psyduck line, the Cleffa line, the Fletchling line, the Crabrawler line, the Krabby line, the Oddish line, the Surskit line, the Scatterbug line. Specifically, the Vivillon seem to be in the Loqua region, the Sun pattern. That's the only Vivillon we've seen, so just something interesting to note there. The Mankey line, the Dino line, Heatmore and Durant, the Spearow line, the Cutiefly line. We've seen a Pansage, so not only will we infer Simisage, but I am also going to infer that the other elemental monkeys, Pampor, Simipour, Pansear, and Simisear, will also be here. The Bonsly line, the Ducklet line, Dedenne, the Goomy line, and this one's kind of interesting because I could actually see this one being Hisuian just because of how untouched Loqua is, but we're going to guess that it is the Kalosian, Sliggoo, and Goodra. There's the Togepi line, Sigilyph, the Swablu line, Tauros, specifically the Cantonium Formicine, the Venipede line, and then this next one's interesting. We see Stantler, and we know that in the modern day, Stantler can't evolve, but again, Loqua's so untouched and also just so ripe with, like, Pokemon and the rare kind of Pokemon we see. I'm actually going to infer that Weirdeer does happen here. I think that Stantler can evolve into Weirdeer here in the Loqua region. And then this is when we get into the starters that we can find here. We have the Rowlet line, the Poplio line, the Turtwig line, the Chikorita and Totodile lines, the Froakie line, and the Mudkip line and Bulbasaur line. Then also there are several, and this is what makes Loqua really, really cool, there are several legendary Pokemon that at least migrate to Loqua. We've seen that the Cantonian birds do, specifically their Cantonian forms. We've seen that Latios and Latias do, and we've also seen a Terrakion and a Virizion there. And because Terrakion and Virizion are there, I'm going to assume that also Cobalion and even Keldeo are also found here. And then it gets even more interesting because there is a wild Zygarde and wild Rayquaza there. And you might go, hey, you said you're not using Pokemon that were brought in from other trainers. And you're right, I wasn't, because they are owned by those trainers. So when Liko leaves Loqua, her Floragato and her Hatchrim are leaving Loqua. But with Rayquaza and Zygarde, it's a little bit different. Because of, and here's where we get into some spoilers, Lucius and Gibeon freaking died. Rayquaza and also Zygarde are now wild Pokemon. And so, yeah, they're wild, and last we saw them was here in Loqua, so they very well could live here. And this kind of makes it interesting because if we did get a Loqua game, perhaps these would be our box legendaries. There'd be one version where you're, going to be aiming to get the black Rayquaza, and then one where you're aiming to get the white Zygarde, which would be so, so cool. Shiny past legends as your box legendaries would be insane. But yeah, these Pokemon are wild here, and you might say, what about the other heroes? Arboliva, Galarian Moltres, Lapras, Cleavor, and Gouging Fire. Well, we actually know because of a preview that it looks like these were captured by Spinel, so they are definitely not in Loqua and didn't even remain in Loqua for long. But we do see that a 6 cage is empty, which implies that Rayquaza very much is alive and well and not captured and probably still in Loqua. But this makes about 192 Pokemon, and because we're adding in the Litten line into this, that would be 195. So, for just seeing this from the anime, this is actually a pretty high number. I mean, you figure, a lot of dexes are like 300-ish. Like in the modern day, there are a lot of regions like or at least subsections like the Isle of Armor or Kitakami that have a smaller deck size like this. So seeing this number of, 195 right at the 200 mark is pretty insane. Now, as for the gimmick and the story that would occur in this Loqua game, well, that's when we get into Loquium, which is this crystal in Loqua, and we've seen this used on Pokemon, and it makes the Pokemon significantly stronger, but also makes them lose control. Like we see even with a Pokemon that has as strong of a bond to its trainer as Freed's Pikachu, we see that Pikachu turns on its teammate Charizard and the two attack each other. So it just shows how controlling this Loquium is. So I imagine that the story would revolve around the ethics of using Loquium on your Pokemon, with the professor potentially being a twist villain who's just so obsessed with making Pokemon stronger he kind of doesn't care about the side effects. Or if they wanted to make him a genuinely good guy, he could be someone who is trying to look for a more environmentally friendly, Pokemon friendly, ethically sourced answer to this Loquium effect. And perhaps that could be Mega Evolution. We've already been teased that there could be some kind of connection between the Kalos region and Loquium, which is interesting because, of course, the Kalos region is where Mega Evolution occurs. And this also suggests potentially a 196 Pokemon, that's Diancie. Loquium is this kind of pink crystal color, and then its connection to potentially Mega Evolution does make one think of Diancie, because Diancie is capable of Mega Evolving and also creating these pink little crystals that look very much like Loquium. So yeah, that's kind of my idea for what a Loqua game could look like, as well as what the decks for this region would be. I'm sure there's many more Pokemon, and these are just the ones we saw, because like I said, some of these we inferred, like Panpour and Pansear, we inferred because we saw Pansage. So yeah, I imagine it's a pretty big region. Will we ever see it? No, probably not. But hopefully we will see more of it in Horizons and maybe get to see more of the decks for this. The idea of these true dexes really fascinates me. You know, so many dexes of past regions are actually incorrect, if I'm honest. And that's something that I'd be interested in revisiting. So if you like this style of video, you like the idea of revisiting past dexes and kind of, putting Pokemon where they should be in the National Dex order, let me know. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Liking and subscribing is a great way to show me that you do like this style of video. Also, too, I do have YouTube memberships open. If you'd like to support me financially, you can do that through YouTube memberships. There's a few perks in there. You can read the details for all the information on that, but that is greatly appreciated. Thank you all so much, and until next time, I will see all of you later.